Hi, as that probably makes clear, I'm from the think tank Demos. And at the beginning of this year, Emily asked us to look at the work that's going on with PeckhamTV and will be going on at Peckham Space. And specifically, she wanted us to look at the different projects from the perspective of policy making, and also look at how they contributed to the idea of democratic engagement. To kick that off, what we're going to think about tonight, we're going to cover the topic of the artistic production and social change. But before I hand over to Saul and Harold, who'll tell us about the real meat of what's going on, I'd like to start by talking about some of the themes and topics that will set a context for that discussion and help us think about the role of art in relation to society and politics more widely. And I'd like to do this not by making a case or making a specific argument, but by raising some of the questions that I'm hoping that Peckham Space, PeckhamTV will help us answer. Some art does definitely make political statements. Oh, sorry, that's the crowd scene I should put up. But it's not always so easy to think about art in political contexts. Often there's well-founded fear that artistic independence of production can be stifled by political involvement. And from the other perspective, politicians can be sceptical of art as something that is soft and too easily dismissed as elitist. Well, some of the changes and developments that I'll talk about make me think that that perhaps ought to change. The first relates to public engagement as a whole, and more precisely its decline. And the second relates to changes that we're seeing in public participation in culture and in the arts in general. And finally, borrowing from a very good book that I recently had the pleasure of reviewing, there's the role of the arts in provoking democracy. And I'll return to each of these themes as we go along. To give you a bit of context, though, and introduce Demos, it would probably help if I explained who we are, what we do, and so on. We're an educational charity founded in 1993, and there's a team of about 25 of us, and we have a wider network of associates. In fact, one of the things that we're doing at the moment is quite pertinent to this, and we're exploring different means that there are of discussing ideas relating to policy making more widely, and in ways that challenge a political world that can too often be very Westminster focused. And one of these is the visual arts. We've just started doing this, and I think it's in the autumn, we'll be having an artist in residence in the office actually working with us as we deal with policy issues. So I'll be very interested to hear your thoughts later on about how your practice can actually work in relation to what I do. Just to give you a flavour, this is an idea that one of our interns had. He's just completed his MA at the RCA. When we launched a pamphlet about young people in public space, he turned the pavements of Southwark into a playground on the day of the launch. And this was actually quite interesting because it actually forced people to engage with the idea of kids actually on the pavements and as a space that's their own. Generally, we work in a range of areas to investigate how policy can be shaped in the future. Some of us work on science issues, others electoral issues, and others on things like public services. I specialise in culture and the arts, and my colleagues, Pete and Joost, with whom I'll be working on the Camberwell project, specialise in public information and public space, respectively. The important thing to say is that we're independent, so we don't actually work at the government's behest, and we're not affiliated to any particular party. And what that means is we have the flexibility to pursue ideas that we find interesting, and in particular, work with people as we meet them and organisations who are doing interesting things. And Peckham Space was one of those, and it chimed very much with some of the work that we've been doing over the past few years. Across a range of areas, we've actually looked at the mechanisms by which the public voice is represented in policy making, and the different means that there are of connecting government to people's opinion and daily lives. These have included local assemblies, through to the importance of creative thinking and creative learning in providing young people with the skills and opportunities to relate their values to the wider world. I noticed that on the programme, Emily, you listed us as the think tank for everyday democracy. So let me explain that a bit and explain how that relates to what's going on at Peckham Space. Everyday democracy grew out of a trend, or the observation of a trend, that over the past decade has worried policymakers, political scientists, and many others. And that's the fear that people seem to be less engaged in politics at the moment. Across the developed world, voter turnouts are in decline. In the last general election, 2 out of every 5 people, 40%, whichever way you want to cut it, didn't vote for who would govern for the next 5 years. By way of comparison, turnout in 1950 was 83%. At the local government level, the level at which much government is actually felt, turnouts are even more worrying. They hover at around 40%. And many people have taken this to mean that the public's apathetic when it comes to politics. But is that really the case? Do people really not care about politics and what's going on? Well, actually, there's plenty to suggest that they do. Single-issue politics are on the rise. Nationwide, millions protested against the Iraq War, and campaign groups from either pro or anti-fox hunting through to Fathers for Justice have become a regular part of the political environment. Of course, there have always been similarly active groups, from the Luddites in the 19th century through to the suffragettes, but the combination of 24-hour media and the ease with which we can use technology to group together around these issues and also communicate our ideas to far greater numbers than ever before means that the rise of single-issue politics is likely to continue and will also have growing impact. Furthermore, although this trend is intrinsically bound up in the internet, it doesn't even have to be online. Thousands have bought wristbands to symbolise their allegiance to particular causes, and every day lots of people choose to spend that little bit extra to buy fair trade coffee or other ethically based consumer goods. And this all amounts to quite a lot. What's becoming clear is that democracy is now better understood as the mass sum of individual actions and individual choices made every day. And it's much better understood than in the wranglings of Westminster and our representatives in Parliament. It's not that we don't need representation, far from it. There will always be issues that are beyond the public control and will need managing and will need representation. But it's more that we now have a plentiful range of choice, and all those choices provide a far richer mosaic of our opinion than the boxes on the ballot paper. And this is what we call everyday democracy. What's needed is to reconnect political representation to ways in which people are actually finding to express and articulate their opinion, and draw recognition of that into political decision-making and political structures. Well, one of these is culture. And culture, I'll admit, is one of the most difficult words there is to define. But as a suggestion, I mean culture as the everyday calculus of histories, behaviours, consumption and production that has made us and makes us who we are, and identifies us, each one of us, as being either different or similar from the others. I think that wider definition is important because it makes what we know about cultural provision and activity much more significant. And it helps make the often problematic connection between the ideas of art and politics simpler.